Welcome back to another deep dive into the darkest corners of Fallout lore. Today's confession comes from someone who discovered a truth so disturbing it cost her everything she had built. We are exploring the terrifying possibility of orbital survivors space stations that never came down, and the people who have been watching the Wasteland for 2 centuries. This is the story of humanity's ultimate observers waiting in perfect patience for the right moment to return and reclaim a world they never really left. Let the confession begin. I am broadcasting this signal from coordinates I cannot disclose, using equipment I stole from people who would kill me if they knew what I discovered. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, former lead researcher in advanced systems analysis at the Institute, and I need you to understand something that will sound impossible. I have proof that humanity survived the Great War in space, and they have been watching us for 200 years. 3 years ago, I was reassigned to telecommunications salvage operations. The Institute needed better signal equipment to extend our synth network, so they sent me topside to raid pre-war facilities. Most scientists hate surface duty, but I volunteered constantly. While my colleagues were terrified of radiation and raiders, I saw an opportunity they did not. I could access sites the Institute had not yet cataloged, places where original records still existed, terminals that had not been wiped or corrupted. That is how I found the Goldstone complex in the Mojave Wasteland. The building was half collapsed, filled with feral ghouls and rad scorpions, but the underground levels were intact. Deep in the third sublevel, I found a communications array that had been designed for deep space monitoring. The equipment was ancient, covered in dust, but the backup reactors still had enough fuel for basic operations. I told the Institute I needed 6 weeks to evaluate salvage potential. In reality, I spent that time bringing the array back online. The first week was just basic restoration, clearing debris, replacing fuses, running diagnostics on systems that had not operated since October 2077. I expected nothing, honestly. This was scientific curiosity, the same drive that made me question Institute doctrine about the surface being irredeemable. But on day 9, while calibrating the main dish array, I detected something that should not exist. A signal, faint but structured, repeating on a 72-hour cycle, coming from high orbit. I spent the next 4 days verifying that signal was real and not some atmospheric interference or pre-war automated system running on fumes. The encryption was military grade, using codes that were already obsolete when the bombs fell, but the signal strength indicated active broadcast, not passive echo. Something in orbit was deliberately transmitting, and it had been doing so for a very long time. When I returned to the Institute, I said, nothing. I submitted my salvage report, recommended the site for future acquisition, and requested assignment to historical database analysis. Father approved without question. Why would he doubt me? I had been loyal for 15 years, a model scientist who never questioned our mission to perfect synthetic humanity. He did not know I had smuggled out 3 backup drives containing every file from Goldstone's archives. What I found in those archives changed everything I thought I knew about the Great War. There were launch manifests for orbital platforms I had never heard of, maintenance schedules for space stations that should have fallen from orbit decades ago, and personnel rosters for crews trained in long-term survival. The United States did not just have satellites before the war. They had manned stations, fully equipped for extended operations, with life support systems designed for multi-generational habitation. The most critical file was labeled Project Olympus, dated November 2076, marked with clearance codes that exceeded anything I had seen at the Institute. It detailed a contingency plan, a program to evacuate key personnel to orbital platforms if ground-based survival became impossible. The document referenced the Ballistic Orbital Missile Base 001, or BOMB 001, as primary habitat, with secondary sites including Valiant research stations and something called Exodus 7, BOMB 001. 001 was not just a weapons platform. According to the specifications, it was a donut-shaped structure measuring 400 meters in diameter, equipped with hydroponics bays, water reclamation systems, a medical facility, and enough storage for 5 years of consumables. The official capacity was 6 crew members for weapon operations, but the habitat modules could support up to 60 people if rationing protocols were implemented. More importantly, the station carried deep sleep hibernation pods, an experimental technology that had been successfully tested by the United States Space Administration in 2070. I cross-referenced this with other data I had recovered from Institute raids on pre-war facilities. In the ruins of a Vault-Tec corporate office, I found references to Protocol Olympus in executive communications. One memo, dated March 2077, discussed ensuring continuity above if continuity below fails, suggesting Vault-Tec executives knew about the orbital evacuation plan. Another document mentioned shipments of hibernation equipment to Bloomfield Space Center in Arizona, the same facility that had been building Bomb 003 before the war. The deep sleep technology was the key to everything. In 2070, the USA launched a mission with 4 astronauts who entered hibernation pods shortly after achieving orbit. They were supposed to wake in 2075, with a possible extension to 2080. That mission eventually crashed in Appalachia in 2103, 33 years after launch. One astronaut survived. If hibernation could sustain someone for that long, then rotating sleep schedules could keep a crew alive indefinitely. 6 people could maintain a space station for centuries if only 2 were awake at any time, performing basic maintenance while the others slept. I needed more evidence. Signal detection was not enough. I needed visual confirmation, orbital tracking data, something that would prove these stations still existed. So, I began a second project, one even more dangerous than the first. I started stealing equipment from the Institute itself. Over 18 months, I diverted components' routine requisitions. A targeting scope here, optical sensors there, processing chips from damaged synths. Each piece was small enough to avoid notice, but together they formed something the Institute would never approve: a telescope. Not a simple Wasteland scavenger's toy, but a precision instrument capable of tracking objects in high orbit. I assembled it in an abandoned observatory north of Boston, a place so irradiated that even super mutants avoided it. The radiation was actually beneficial, keeping away anyone who might discover what I was doing. I wore a rad suit, worked in 4-hour shifts, and slowly brought the telescope online. It took 7 months before I could calibrate the tracking system, another 3 before I could link it to the Goldstone array for signal triangulation. Then, on a clear night in September, exactly 3 years after I found that first signal, I saw them. Not with my own eyes, but through image enhancement and long exposure photography. 4 distinct objects in stable orbit, too large to be pre-war satellites, maintaining positions that required active station-keeping maneuvers. They were not drifting debris. They were under intelligent control. I spent the next 6 months verifying orbital mechanics, calculating decay rates, confirming that these objects had been actively maneuvering to maintain their positions. Natural orbital decay would have brought them down decades ago. Someone was making course corrections, burning fuel, adjusting trajectories. The objects matched the dimensions of Bomb 001, Kovac Muldoon platform, and 2 unidentified structures that could be Valiant-class stations. Then I made contact. I had been broadcasting on old USA frequencies using authentication codes I found in Goldstone's databases, trying every possible combination. Most transmissions vanished into void, but 3 weeks ago, something answered. Not with words, but with a data packet, compressed and encrypted, containing a single message that had been logged 2 days earlier. The message read, "Crew in deep sleep. Surface conditions remain hostile. Awaiting improvement metrics. Do not attempt re-entry. Bomb 001. Commander Reynolds. Day 7-3. 2-5 of continuous operations. Day 7. 1325 is exactly 200 years. I need you to understand what this means. While we fought over scraps in the ruins, while the Institute built synths and the Brotherhood hoarded technology, there were people above us, watching everything, waiting in perfect safety. They saw the bombs fall. They monitored the radiation as it spread and eventually decreased. They watched settlements form, watched factions wage war, watched us struggle to survive while they slept in shifts, conserving resources, maintaining their orbital fortress. The psychological horror of this cannot be overstated. They have perfect intelligence on every major faction. From orbit, they can see Brotherhood airships, track NCR troop movements, monitor Institute activity. They know where we are, what we are doing, how we fight, and they have chosen not to intervene. Why? What are they waiting for? The most terrifying possibility is that they are waiting for us to develop sufficiently to be useful. Think about it from their perspective. They have advanced technology, manufacturing capabilities in zero gravity, and perfect strategic position, but they lack numbers, genetic diversity, and ground resources. If they descended now, they would need to conquer us, subdue us, establish dominance. But if they wait until we have rebuilt infrastructure, re-established industrial capacity, and created stable societies, then they could arrive as saviors rather than conquerors, and we would welcome them. If you are still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button. I have analyzed the power requirements for maintaining orbital stations, and the numbers reveal something even more disturbing. Bomb 001 was designed with a temporary generator because the main reactor never arrived before the war. According to Bloomfield Space Center records, that temporary generator could sustain basic life support for approximately 10 years at absolute minimum power consumption. Yet these stations have been operational for 200 years. That means they found a way to generate or acquire additional power in orbit. The most likely explanation is solar collection. Pre-war technology had already developed high-efficiency photovoltaic arrays for long-duration space missions. If the station crews cannibalized communication satellites, military platforms, or other orbital debris, they could have assembled solar farms large enough to power their operations indefinitely. I have observed what appears to be regular debris collection patterns, objects changing trajectories to intercept defunct satellites, suggesting active salvage operations have been occurring for decades. But solar power alone does not explain everything. The bomb platforms were designed as weapon systems, each carrying 24 nuclear-tipped missiles. Even if only partially loaded, Bomb 001 would have possessed enough nuclear armament to destroy every major settlement in the Wasteland. The question that keeps me awake at night is simple. Do they still have those weapons? Have they maintained the missiles, kept them operational, ready to launch if we somehow threaten their orbital sanctuary? I found partial answers in a location I should never have accessed. 6 months ago, the Institute sent me to investigate pre-war military installations in the capital Wasteland. Officially, I was searching for weapons technology. Unofficially, I was tracking down any reference to orbital command structures. In the ruins of what was once the Pentagon, I found a terminal that had been powered by backup fusion cells, still running after 2 centuries. The terminal contained fragmentary logs from October 2077, the final days before communication with orbital assets was lost. One entry, dated October 21st, 2 days before the bombs fell, reported that Bomb 001 and Bomb 002 had both been brought to full combat readiness. All missile systems were armed. Targeting solutions had been calculated for Chinese mainland installations, and crews were on high alert. Then the war happened. Communications failed, and the next entry simply read, "All ground control lost. Orbital assets presumed autonomous." Autonomous. That single word carries terrifying implications. The stations were designed to operate independently if ground command was destroyed. They had authorization protocols, contingency orders, rules of engagement that would activate if certain conditions were met. What were those conditions? Under what circumstances would a space station watching Earth burn decide to launch its remaining nuclear missiles at the ruins below? I cross-referenced this with data I recovered from the White Spring Congressional Bunker in Appalachia. That facility had been connected to the Kovac Muldoon platform, an orbital surveillance and strike satellite that was still partially functional as of 2103. The bunker's eye, Modus, had been able to direct orbital strikes, call in supply drops, and access reconnaissance data from orbit. If Kovac Muldoon survived, and if other platforms maintain similar capabilities, then whoever controls those stations possesses weapons that make every surface faction's arsenal look primitive by comparison. The technological disparity is staggering. Institute scientists pride themselves on being the most advanced organization in the Wasteland. We have molecular teleportation, synthetic biology, and advanced robotics, but compared to functional orbital weapons platforms with 200 years of zero-gravity manufacturing, we are children playing with broken toys. If station-born engineers have been maintaining and improving their systems, learning from failures, adapting technology in ways we cannot imagine, then they might possess capabilities that would seem like magic to anyone on the surface. I have documented evidence of orbital construction activity. Through telescope observation, I have recorded what appears to be expansion of one structure, new modules being attached, solar arrays being repositioned. This suggests they are not merely surviving in orbit, they are building, growing, preparing for something. The scale of construction indicates a long-term project, something that has been underway for decades, possibly a generation ship or deep space vessel. The pre-war plans I found reference something called Exodus 7, described only as contingency vehicle for species, continuation beyond solar system if planetary recovery deemed impossible. The document was heavily redacted, but it mentioned assembly in orbit, multi-generational capability, and a destination that was listed only as viable alternative. If they have been building an interstellar arc for 2 centuries, they might be close to completion, and if they leave, they will take with them all the knowledge, technology, and genetic diversity that could help rebuild Earth. But there is another possibility, one that I find even more disturbing. What if they are not planning to leave? What if they are preparing to descend? I have detected changes in orbital patterns over the past year. The objects are gradually lowering their altitude, not enough to cause immediate re-entry, but enough to suggest deliberate preparation. It is like watching someone climb down a ladder, taking their time, checking each rung before committing weight. They are not falling, they are descending with purpose. I think they have been waiting for specific conditions. Radiation levels in most regions have decreased to survivable levels. Major population centers have been re-established. Technology is being rediscovered and rebuilt. We have proven we can survive, adapt, and rebuild civilization from ashes. From their perspective, we have done the hard work of clearing radiation, dealing with immediate threats, and establishing basic infrastructure. Now the planet is ready for their return. The strategic calculus is brilliant in its cruelty. If they had descended immediately after the war, they would have faced impossible radiation levels, complete infrastructure collapse, and desperate populations willing to kill for any advantage. But by waiting 200 years, they arrive at a planet that has stabilized enough to be useful, but remains primitive enough to be controlled. We have rebuilt just enough to be worth conquering. I have found evidence suggesting they have already begun making contact, not openly, but through careful infiltration and observation. There are reports from across the wasteland of strangers who appear in settlements, ask detailed questions about local politics and technology, then vanish before anyone can learn where they came from. The Brotherhood has documented encounters with individuals who possessed pre-war knowledge that no vault dweller or ghoul could explain. The Institute has intercepted radio transmissions using encryption methods that should not exist. What if some of them have already come down? Not in force, not openly, but as scouts, gathering intelligence, assessing our capabilities, identifying potential allies and threats. They would need to understand surface conditions before committing to full descent. They would want to know which factions could be negotiated with, which would need to be neutralized, and where the most valuable resources could be found. The Valiant one. Crash in Appalachia might not have been an accident. I have studied the trajectory data from wreckage analysis reports. The angle of descent suggests controlled reentry that went wrong in the final approach, not catastrophic system failure. What if they were attempting a landing? What if that was a test to see if station-born humans adapted to zero gravity could survive Earth's gravity? The fact that one astronaut survived 33 years in hibernation and then months on the surface proves it is possible. I have calculated the biological implications of 200 years in zero gravity. Even with artificial gravity from rotation, which the bomb stations were not designed to provide, humans born in space would develop differently. Bone density would decrease, cardiovascular systems would adapt to low-stress environments, and muscle development would be fundamentally altered. Anyone born on those stations would find Earth's gravity crushing, possibly fatal without extensive preparation or medical intervention. But that assumes they have not solved that problem. 2 centuries is long enough to develop medical treatments, genetic modifications, or cybernetic enhancements that could allow spaceborne humans to function on Earth. The Institute achieved synthetic biology in less than a century, working with limited resources. What could orbital scientists achieve with unlimited time, zero-gravity manufacturing, and access to pre-war research databases that were never destroyed? The more I learn, the more I realize we are not prepared for what is coming. The Brotherhood thinks they are defending humanity with their steel and laser weapons. The Institute believes they represent the future with their synths. The NCR thinks they are rebuilding civilization with laws and democracy. But none of them understand they are being watched by people who possess technology we cannot match, strategic position we cannot threaten, and patience we cannot comprehend. I have tried to warn them. 3 months ago, I sent an encrypted message to Elder Maxon of the Brotherhood, detailing everything I had discovered. The message was intercepted by Institute security. I was brought before Father for interrogation. He did not believe my claims about orbital survivors. He thought I had been compromised by surface radiation, that my mind had been damaged by prolonged exposure to the Wasteland. He reassigned me to internal research, confined to the Institute complex, under constant observation. That was when I realized the truth about Father, about the Institute's leadership, about everyone who holds power in the Wasteland. They cannot accept that there might be something greater than themselves, something they cannot control or understand. Their entire identity is built on being the most advanced, the most intelligent, the ones who will determine humanity's future. The existence of orbital survivors threatens that identity, so they reject it without investigation. I escaped 2 weeks ago during a synth retrieval operation that went badly. In the chaos of super mutant attacks and collapsing buildings, I simply walked away. The Institute thinks I am dead, crushed under rubble along with 3 coursers and a dozen Gen 1 synths. I took nothing with me except the data drives hidden in my suit lining and the knowledge that I am probably the only person on Earth who understands what is about to happen. I have established this broadcast station in a location that I will not disclose, using salvaged equipment and power cells that will last approximately 6 more months. I am transmitting on multiple frequencies, hoping someone will listen, someone will investigate, someone will take this threat seriously before it is too late. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the Wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores. The signal I received from Bomb 001 was not the only message I have intercepted. Over the past 3 weeks, I have documented 17 separate transmissions from orbit, each using different encryption protocols, each originating from distinct orbital positions. They are not just surviving up there, they are communicating with each other, coordinating activities, maintaining what appears to be a functioning government or command structure across multiple platforms. The transmissions are brief, heavily compressed, and contain data I cannot fully decrypt without access to institute computational resources I no longer possess. But I have been able to extract fragments, pieces of conversations that reveal the mindset of people who have spent 2 centuries watching us from above. One message, partially decoded, contained a phrase that has haunted me since I first read it. Surface factions demonstrate acceptable technological progression. Recommend advancement to Phase 3 of Descent Protocol. Phase 3. That implies there have been Phase 1 and Phase 2, stages of a plan that has been unfolding for years, possibly decades, without anyone on the surface realizing we were being evaluated, tested, measured against criteria we did not know existed. I have tried to reconstruct what those earlier phases might have been. Phase 1 was likely pure observation, gathering data on radiation levels, climate patterns, and biological recovery. They would have monitored wildlife populations, tracked the spread of mutations, and documented the gradual decrease in background radiation. This phase probably lasted 50 to 70 years, long enough to establish that Earth would eventually be habitable again. Phase 2 must have involved monitoring human populations, watching as we emerged from vaults and bunkers, observing how we rebuilt societies, fought wars, and developed new technologies. They would have studied our factions, analyzed our strengths and weaknesses, and identified potential collaborators and potential threats. The fact that they consider our technological progression acceptable suggests they have been comparing our development against some predetermined standard. Now we are entering Phase 3, Descent Protocol. The words themselves are clinical, bureaucratic, the language of people implementing a long-term plan with methodical precision. But what does descent actually mean? Is it diplomatic contact, military invasion, or something more subtle? Are they planning to arrive as saviors offering advanced technology or as conquerors enforcing submission? I have found clues in the strangest places. 2 months before I escaped the Institute, I was analyzing salvaged holotapes from a pre-war military installation. Most were corrupted beyond recovery, but one contained a partial recording of a meeting dated November 2076, just weeks before the bombs fell. A general was briefing senior officers about contingency plans, and he said something that I initially dismissed as paranoid delusion. He said, "If Project Olympus is activated, the orbital command structure will have complete autonomy to determine when and how to re-establish contact with surface survivors. They will be instructed to wait until surface conditions permit safe integration and to ensure that returning personnel will not face hostile resistance from irradiated populations." Hostile resistance from irradiated populations. That is what they think of us. We are not fellow survivors struggling to rebuild. We are potential threats, irradiated savages who might attack their returning forces. From their perspective, everyone born after the war is genetically compromised, mentally unstable, and culturally primitive. They see themselves as pure strain humanity, the last inheritors of true civilization, returning to claim a world that rightfully belongs to them. The eugenic implications are staggering. If they have maintained genetic diversity through careful breeding programs, if they have preserved pre-war genetic material and knowledge, they might view themselves as superior to everyone on the surface. Vault dwellers are seen as experimental subjects of corporate cruelty. Wastelanders are mutated and radiation scarred. Even Institute scientists like myself, despite our technological achievements, are the descendants of people who endured 2 centuries of exposure to radioactive fallout. I have detected evidence of genetic research in the orbital transmissions. Medical terminology, references to embryonic development in zero gravity, discussions of radiation resistance enhancement. If they have been conducting breeding programs designed to create humans optimized for both space and Earth environments, they could have populations that are genuinely superior in certain measurable ways. Stronger immune systems, greater resistance to radiation, enhanced cognitive capabilities developed through generations of rigorous intellectual selection. But superiority in controlled environments does not guarantee superiority in the wasteland. They have never faced a deathclaw, never navigated a rad storm, never negotiated with super mutants or outsmarted raiders. Their 200 years of safety have protected them, but also isolated them from the harsh evolutionary pressures that shaped us. We are survivors precisely because we adapted to impossible conditions. They are survivors because they never had to adapt at all. I think this is what they miscalculate. They assume their technology and genetic purity give them insurmountable advantages. They do not understand that wasteland humans have developed capabilities they cannot replicate. We can survive on minimal resources, fight with improvised weapons, and endure conditions that would kill anyone raised in climate-controlled comfort. A Brotherhood paladin in power armor, a NCR ranger who has spent years in the desert, or even a raider who has survived by pure vicious cunning, these are not primitive savages. These are apex predators shaped by 2 centuries of the harshest selection pressure imaginable. The military implications keep me awake at night. If they descend with orbital strike capabilities, they could destroy the Brotherhood's Pridwin, the Institute's reactor, or the NCR's major settlements before any defense could be mounted. One kinetic strike from orbit, a simple tungsten rod accelerated by gravity, could penetrate any bunker, destroy any fortification, and leave no radiation to complicate occupation. They do not need nuclear weapons. They have the ultimate high ground and unlimited ammunition in the form of orbital debris. But military conquest would be messy, expensive in terms of resources, and potentially catastrophic if we managed to damage their limited numbers during the fighting. I think they prefer a different approach. I think they want us to welcome them. Consider how they might present themselves. They arrive not as conquerors, but as rescuers, bringing advanced medicine, clean power generation, and knowledge that could transform the wasteland overnight. They offer to cure radiation sickness, eliminate super mutants, and restore pre-war agricultural productivity. Most settlements would accept immediately. The benefits would seem too valuable to refuse. Then, slowly, subtly, they begin to integrate themselves into positions of authority. Their technology becomes indispensable. Their advice becomes necessary. Their presence becomes normal. Within a generation, they control everything without ever firing a shot. We would choose subjugation because the alternative, continuing to struggle in the wasteland, would seem unnecessarily harsh when paradise is offered freely. I have seen this pattern before. The Institute does exactly this with their synth infiltrators: replace key individuals, influence decisions, and manipulate outcomes while maintaining the illusion of local autonomy. The orbital survivors would employ the same strategy on a continental scale, using superior technology instead of synthetic replacements. There is another possibility that terrifies me even more. What if they do not want to rule us? What if they simply want to replace us? Think about the mathematics. Bomb 001 could house 60 people in emergency conditions. If they have been practicing strict population control, maintaining genetic diversity through careful breeding programs, they might have kept their population stable at manageable levels. But 200 years is 8 to 10 generations. Even with perfect contraception and population management, genetic drift and the need for diversity would create pressures to expand. They cannot expand in orbit without massive resource expenditure. But Earth offers unlimited space, established infrastructure that could be repaired, and an environment that is gradually returning to habitability. If they view surface populations as genetically compromised and culturally incompatible, They might decide the most efficient solution is simply to eliminate us and repopulate the planet themselves. The weapons are already in place. Bomb 001 alone could carry enough nuclear missiles to sterilize major population centers. If multiple platforms coordinate strikes, they could destroy every significant settlement in North America within hours. Then, they wait a few more decades for radiation to decrease again, descend to an empty planet, and begin rebuilding civilization according to their vision, without the complication of dealing with irradiated survivors who might resist their authority. I pray I am wrong about this. I hope they retain enough humanity, enough connection to the people they left behind, to see us as fellow humans rather than obstacles to be removed. But 200 years of isolation, of watching us fight and struggle and fail, might have eroded their empathy. From orbit, we look like ants, scurrying through ruins, fighting over scraps. It is easy to devalue life when you observe it from such distance. I have been trying to establish direct communication to bypass whatever protocols prevent them from responding to surface transmissions. I have broadcast messages in old USA codes, military authentication sequences, even personal appeals using names I found in crew rosters from 2077. Nothing has worked. They receive my transmissions, I am certain of that, but they choose not to respond. Their silence is a decision, a calculated choice to maintain distance until they are ready to act. 3 days ago, something changed. I detected a new signal, different from the regular status updates and interstation communications. This transmission was directed at Earth, specifically at coordinates in the Commonwealth near Boston. It was brief, lasting less than 2 seconds, but the signal strength was enormous, far greater than necessary for simple communication. It was a targeting pulse, the kind of signal used to designate strike coordinates for orbital weapons. I have been monitoring those coordinates constantly since then. Nothing has happened yet. No strike, no explosion, no visible change. But something has been marked, selected for attention, cataloged in their targeting systems. The Institute is located in that region, so is the Brotherhood's main base. Either could be the target, or perhaps both. I think they are preparing final targeting solutions before descent. They are identifying threats that must be neutralized, capabilities that could interfere with their plans, and concentrations of technology that might pose risks to their operations. The Brotherhood's energy weapons, the Institute's teleportation technology, the Railroad's infiltration networks, all of these represent potential complications that would be easier to eliminate from orbit than to manage on the ground. The timeline is accelerating. I can feel it in the frequency of transmissions, the intensity of orbital maneuvering, the precision of their surveillance. Whatever they have been planning, whatever protocol they are following, we are approaching the final stages. I estimate we have months at most, possibly only weeks, before they make their move. I have tried to warn everyone who might listen. I sent messages to Diamond City Security, to Brotherhood outposts, to trading caravans that travel between settlements. Most dismiss me as insane, another wasteland lunatic raving about conspiracies. A few listen, ask questions, then decide the threat is too abstract, too distant to warrant action when they face immediate dangers from raiders and super mutants. Only one person has taken me seriously, a Brotherhood scribe named Halen, stationed at a remote outpost, who has been tracking anomalous signals for years. She has detected the same patterns I have, the same regular transmissions, the same evidence of orbital activity. We have been sharing data, comparing observations, trying to assemble a complete picture of what is happening above us. Halen believes we can make contact, that if we demonstrate sufficient technological capability, the orbital survivors might view us as equals rather than primitives. She wants to build a more powerful transmitter, one that could establish two-way communication instead of my one-sided broadcasts. I am less optimistic. I think the time for communication has passed. I think they have already decided what they are going to do, and nothing we say will change their plans. But I help her anyway, because what else can I do? I am a scientist. I solve problems with research, analysis, and technology. The alternative, accepting that we are helpless before an orbital threat we cannot reach or resist, is intolerable. So I work with Halen, building better equipment, refining our data, and hoping that somehow, against all evidence, we can find a way to change what is coming. Last night, I intercepted the transmission I have been dreading. It was brief, encoded in a format I had never seen before, but I managed to decrypt enough to understand its meaning. The message originated from Bomb 001 and was directed to all other orbital platforms simultaneously. It read, "Descent authorization confirmed. Phase 3 implementation scheduled for spring 2288. All stations prepare for atmospheric entry sequence. Surface integration protocol approved. Spring 2288. That is less than 4 months from now." I immediately contacted Halen with the information. She was silent for a long moment, then asked the question I had been asking myself. What do we do? How do we prepare for something like this? Do we warn people and risk mass panic, or do we stay silent and hope that somehow their intentions are peaceful? We decided to investigate one final lead. In all my research, I kept finding references to a location called Site R, a pre-war continuity of government facility that supposedly maintained communication links with orbital assets. The location was heavily classified, but I found fragmentary coordinates in a USA database that suggested it was somewhere in the mountains of Pennsylvania, buried deep underground and possibly still operational. Halen and I traveled there together, moving carefully through territory controlled by raiders and super mutants. It took us 11 days to reach the coordinates, another 3 to locate the actual entrance hidden behind a collapsed rock face. The facility was sealed behind blast doors that should have been impossible to open, but Halen had brought Brotherhood override codes that somehow, impossibly, worked. Inside, we found a complex that had been abandoned in perfect order, as if everyone had simply walked out one day and never returned. The terminals were still active, running on geothermal power that had operated continuously for 200 years. The central command center contained a bank of screens displaying orbital tracking data, communication logs, and real-time feeds from satellites that should have fallen from orbit decades ago. Someone had been maintaining this facility. Recently, the dust patterns were wrong. Footprints in the corridors were no more than a week old. Equipment had been moved, terminals accessed, and supplies consumed. We were not alone in this facility, or at least, we were not the first to arrive here in recent times. Then I saw it. On the main display screen, a live feed showing Earth from orbit. The image quality was impossibly clear, better than anything pre-war technology should have achieved. The view was rotating slowly, showing the Commonwealth, the capital Wasteland, the Mojave Desert, all visible in perfect detail. Someone was watching us from above, and they were using this facility to coordinate their observations. Halen began accessing the communication terminals while I examined the orbital tracking data. What I found confirmed my worst fears and revealed truths even more disturbing than I had imagined. The orbital platforms were not just preparing to descend, they had been descending gradually for the past 15 years, lowering their altitude in carefully calculated stages, moving closer to Earth while maintaining stable orbits. But that was not the revelation that made my blood freeze. It was the personnel records. According to the database, Bomb 001 had maintained continuous habitation for 200 years, just as I suspected, but the crew manifest showed something impossible. The current commander was listed as Reynolds, Marcus, the same name from the message I intercepted. But Marcus Reynolds had been the original mission commander in 2077. No human could survive 200 years, not even with hibernation technology, unless they had perfected something the surface world never achieved, unless they had solved the problem of indefinite life extension. I dug deeper into the medical files, and what I found was both miraculous and horrifying. The orbital crews had not just maintained themselves through hibernation rotation, they had developed biological modification techniques that extended human lifespan far beyond natural limits. The The records described cellular regeneration therapy, telomere restoration, and genetic repair mechanisms that could keep human bodies functioning for centuries. Marcus Reynolds was not a descendant of the original commander. He was the original commander, kept alive for 200 years through medical technology we cannot imagine. How many of them were originals? How many of the people preparing to descend had actually witnessed the Great War, had watched the bombs fall, had made the conscious decision to wait 2 centuries before returning? The psychological implications were staggering. These were not descendants who learned about pre-war America from history books. These were people who remembered it, who had lived in it, who had watched their entire civilization destroy itself and spent 200 years deciding what to do about it. I accessed the communication logs and found records of every transmission sent from the orbital platforms over the past 50 years. Most were routine status updates and maintenance reports, but scattered among them were personal journals, recordings that the crew members made for themselves, documenting their thoughts and feelings about the long wait. One entry, recorded by Commander Reynolds himself 30 years ago, contained words that have been echoing in my mind ever since. We watched them burn the world. We watched them poison the air and destroy everything beautiful. We escaped because we were smart enough, important enough, to be given a chance at survival. When we return, we will not make the same mistakes. We will not allow the same failures. Humanity deserves another chance, but only under proper guidance. Proper guidance. He meant their guidance. They had spent 200 years watching us struggle, and they had concluded that we could not be trusted with our own future. Another journal entry, this one from a scientist named Dr. Elizabeth Warren, was even more explicit. The surface populations show remarkable resilience but catastrophic judgment. They fight over resources instead of cooperating. They hoard technology instead of sharing it. They repeat the same tribal conflicts that destroyed the old world. We cannot simply return and hope they will welcome our leadership. We must demonstrate superiority so absolute that resistance becomes unthinkable. I showed these entries to Helen. She read them in silence, her face growing harder with each word. When she finished, she looked at me and said something I will never forget. They are not coming to save us. They are coming to replace us. We spent 3 more days in that facility, copying every file we could access, documenting every piece of evidence. What we found painted a complete picture of their intentions. Phase 3 was not first contact. It was conquest, carefully planned and meticulously prepared. The descent protocol included detailed instructions for neutralizing surface threats. The Brotherhood of Steel was designated as a primary military target due to their technological capabilities and organizational structure. The Institute was marked for immediate destruction, their teleportation technology deemed too dangerous to allow to continue existing. The NCR was classified as a potential ally if properly managed, but their democratic government would need to be dismantled and replaced with appointed leadership. Every major settlement had been cataloged, evaluated, and assigned a threat level. Diamond City was low threat, useful for establishing initial contact. Good Neighbor was marked for elimination due to its culture of resistance to authority. The Pridwin would be destroyed in orbit before it could respond to the threat. They had planned everything. Every contingency, every possibility, every potential resistance had been anticipated and countered. In their 200 years of preparation, they had achieved a level of strategic planning that no surface faction could match. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated our ability to discover their plans. Halen and I left Site R with enough evidence to prove everything. We had communication logs, personnel records, strategic plans, and most importantly, we had the access codes that would allow us to broadcast directly to the orbital platforms on frequencies they could not ignore. Now I am back at my hidden broadcast station, preparing to do something that might doom us all or might save us. I am going to speak directly to Commander Reynolds and everyone else in orbit. I am going to tell them that we know what they are planning, that we have discovered their protocols, and that we will not submit peacefully to conquest, disguised as salvation. I do not know if this will change anything. They might accelerate their timeline, attack immediately before we can prepare defenses. They might dismiss us as insignificant, too primitive to pose a real threat. Or they might, possibly, reconsider their assumptions about surface survivors and recognize that 200 years of wasteland survival has created something they did not anticipate. A humanity that is harder, stronger, and more resourceful than the civilization they remember. I have sent copies of all our evidence to every faction that might listen. The Brotherhood, the Railroad, the Minutemen, even scattered NCR outposts. Some will dismiss it, some will investigate, a few might prepare. That is all I can hope for. In my final analysis, I realize that I have become what the Institute always feared I would become. A rogue element, operating outside acceptable parameters, pursuing truth regardless of consequences. Father was right to be suspicious of my surface assignments. I was contaminated, but not by radiation. I was contaminated by hope, by the stubborn belief that knowledge matters more than safety, that truth matters more than comfort. The people in orbit had safety and comfort for 200 years, and it turned them into something cold and calculating. We had neither, and it turned us into survivors. When they descend, they will discover that survival is the most valuable skill humanity ever developed. I do not know how this will end. I do not know if we can resist an orbital assault, if we can negotiate with people who view us as inferiors, or if we can forge an alliance with survivors who abandoned us 2 centuries ago. What I know is that we deserve the chance to try. The wasteland made us who we are. The radiation, the monsters, the endless struggle for resources, all of it shaped us into something the old world never imagined. We are not the humanity they left behind. We are the humanity that survived the unsurvivable. And that makes us stronger than they comprehend. To Commander Reynolds and everyone else in orbit, I say this. We know you are there. We know what you are planning, and we are ready. Not ready to submit, not ready to be guided or managed or replaced. Ready to stand as equals, to negotiate as peers, to fight if necessary, and to survive whatever you bring down upon us. We did not endure 200 years in hell just to surrender heaven to those who hid in the sky. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It is the only way I know you liked the video. This is Dr. Sarah Chen, broadcasting from somewhere in the wasteland, reminding you that the truth is always worth pursuing, no matter how dangerous it becomes. The orbital exiles are coming home. Let us make sure they understand what home has become.